Hello, comrades and compatriots. My name is TBSky, and I'm a bit of an animation buff. It's one of my favorite art forms, especially 2D animation. There's just something magical about seeing a bunch of lines and color splashes on a page become life. So one of the things I've been pleased to see is the resurgence and re-emergence of animation on YouTube, and the way is being led by, well, vloggers, essentially. People like Jaden Animations, Let Me Explain, and The Odd Ones Out have found great and growing success telling stories, answering questions, and improv rambling to camera, but instead of actually being on camera, they use simplified, often mostly black and white avatars with limited animation to emote as they deliver their voice lines, which... Okay, stop looking at me that way. I stole this from Zero Punctuation back in like 2009, okay? Now, I'm not a trained professional animator, though I did once want to be, and I'm not a masterful scholarly expert, but the animated vloggers have me interested. So in this video, I'm going to take a look at 3 videos from some animation vloggers with a lot of pausing and frame-by-framing my way through it, and talk a little bit about what kinds of animation techniques they use, why they work, and how they use those techniques differently to tell the stories that they want to tell. Well, kids, say goodbye to organized, scripted TBSky and say hello to rambling, staring at a video, and talking TBSky. What you're seeing on the screen in front of you right now is a video by The Odd Ones Out, and he's going to be the first YouTuber we're taking a look at because a lot of the techniques he uses will be coming up again as we look at the other YouTubers in this video. But before we do that, we have to discuss something rather fundamental about animation, and that is frame rates. As you may know, most online video runs at 30 frames per second. Some will run at 25, occasionally you'll get nice videos that run at 60, but mostly 30 frames per second. If you go to see a Hollywood movie, that is rather likely at this, even at this point in time, to run at 24 frames per second. This means that if you want to animate something at 24 frames per second, you need 24 drawings per second of video that you want to create, which means for a 10-second video, that's 240 drawings. Needless to say, people generally don't do that because it is incredibly labor-intensive and it is, in a lot of cases, not really necessary. What most animation studios and individual animators will do is animate at variable frame rates. That is to say, instead of going 24 frames per second all the time, sometimes they'll go 4 frames per second, sometimes they'll go 8, sometimes they'll go 12, 16, all kinds of subdivisions of 24. That they'll use for various situations. If you have an complex emotional scene where characters need to display a lot of emotion in their faces, that's the kind of situation where 24 frames per second might be worth it because you can do a lot of subtle stuff when you have a lot of frames to work with. But if you have a background character who just kind of needs to be picking something up and looking at it or something that's not important to the scene or not even central to the frame of the scene, then just do it at 8 or 4 frames per second because it's not that important, and having him at a low frame rate doesn't really deteriorate the quality of the scene. If you are a YouTube animator, you absolutely do not animate at 24 frames per second. Generally, there's going to be one exception in this video, but mostly you will animate as what you see here, which is from 0 to 4, 5, 6, maybe 8 frames per second at most, depending on the situation. As you can see from just looking at this video with the sound off, most of what's happening on screen at any given time is nothing. Most things in the frame aren't moving, it's only really the character, and even when the character is moving, it's only a small part of them that's moving at a time. There's not any, massive fluent motions going on. It's a lot of still images with limited pieces of the image being moved to animate the scene. So, for instance, you can see here as this guy's about to point accusingly at Grandpa. But notice what happens. The only thing that moves is his arm. I'm gonna frame by frame through it a little bit. See? The only thing that really moves about the character is the arm. This is the only thing that's actually happening in this motion. And that's what's called limited animation, because you pick a limited part of the character and you animate just that. But on top of that, he's using a couple of different techniques, and those are the ones we're going to be discussing when we're talking about The Odd Ones Out. Now first, let's start by just looking at this, motion where he's playing the guitar and singing. So what was actually happening there? Because it seems like there's quite a lot of motion going on when he moves, but as we've discussed, when he chooses to animate motion, he uses very few frames. For example, he's about to rock back now. Rock back and sit further back. Watch how many frames are used here. This is a squash frame. You can see the character doesn't change, it's just being squashed very slightly. This is anticipation. He's anticipating the move that the character is about to make by squashing the character a little bit, which creates some tension, which he can then release by completing the motion. And as you can see, once he's completed the motion to the new pose, this is pose number 1, here's pose number 2, right here. You can see he unsquashes the character a little bit, and that kind of completes that. It's like the character is being squished down, moved to a different pose, and unsquashed. And that is anticipation and follow-through. And if I'm using these terms incorrectly, that's because I'm not a professionally trained animator. These are just the terms as I've heard them used about these things. But the motion itself, it's 1, 2, 3 frames. It's only 3 frames, but because he uses the squashing and the stretching of the character, it seems like a much smoother motion than it really is, because when you give the characters that follow through, that bounce, they come much more alive than if he had just, if he had just been this. You can see this seems kind of static and flat and not really bouncy or alive, but once you add in that little extra bounce of anticipation and follow through, you get an animation that comes alive a lot more, even if the motion is super limited. For instance, here he's gonna strum the guitar. You can see anticipates the motion, starts moving the arm, and then as the arm completes its motion, he finishes the little bounce there, which is what gives it that pop, that almost rubbery feeling of something that is much more alive than if he had only moved the arm without also bouncing the body a little bit. And you can see this comes across. This is very much a signature stylistic choice of the Odd One Side. You can see it happens here. You can see it happens as he keeps playing. You can see there's always that little bounce to it, and there's that little bounce to it with the grandpa as he's speaking. And here, as he points an accusing fist at the old man. Let's see. There we go. You can see he also does that little bounce and squash and stretch. Now, something else he does, which is a fundamental animation technique, is he is choosing to concentrate his frames of motion at particular points. See, here he's about to start moving his arm to point. The motion itself is 1, 2, 3, 4 frames in all. But the first 1, 2, 3 are right here. They're all focused close to the body, the start of the motion. And the final frames there's this huge jump where he goes from close position to pointing position, far away. And what that is that's what helps give it sort of the sensation that he's thrusting his arm. He's not just unfolding his arm slowly towards the old man, he's thrusting it. Which is important for the motion because it's supposed to be sort of an accusatory, nobody cares kind of motion, and you can achieve that by choosing where you put the frames that you use, because if you had spread the frames out equally along the whole motion, you would have gotten a much more slow-looking, deliberate, smooth-looking also kind of motion that wouldn't really communicate what he wants. And you can see here again, the bounce is always there when he does his motions. Something else he does is he draws mouths on his characters, which is something that can be very difficult to deal with because lip sync is really freaking hard. So he chooses mostly not to do it. Instead, he just uses the mouth for expression. It's not moving in time with anything that he says, although he does tend to move his character on some of the beats of his voice in order to synchronize the animation and the audio a little bit. But he just basically uses the mouths for expression, to give the characters an expression of what exactly kind of feeling does he want them to have as they're saying stuff. And perhaps part of the reason why he does that is that with the style of eyes that he's chosen, it can be a little bit difficult to communicate a lot of complex emotion, I think. So yeah, that's the primary thing I think there is to take away from The Odd Ones Out, is that he uses that bounce, that anticipation and follow through on everything. It's almost compulsive with him. It's very much a signature part of his style to have that bounciness to the motion that's going on. And that's a really nice thing because, again, it's a shortcut. It's something that allows you to put more life into a character without having to put a ton more work into it. And all animation is predicated on this constant tension between how much time and budget do you have and how many corners can you cut to kind of cheat the audience into seeing more motion than you're really putting in there. And the anticipation follow-through thing that he does is an excellent example of that. Something else that's worth noting also, by the way, is his style of composition. When it comes to The Odd Ones Out, he tends, for the most part, to have compositions that look, well, like this, where you have a background, an environment, but the characters are sort of pasted on top of it. They're not very much part of the environment. The backgrounds just kind of happen to be there around the characters doing their actions. And again, this is something that makes perfect sense for the format that he's delivering. It is a thing about him telling a story and delivering some key visuals, so it's not really important that the backgrounds be integral, but that's the kind of framing that he tends to choose, is characters in the front of the frame performing the action, and then the background just kind of existing as a backdrop more than as an actual stage where the characters are moving in the sense that it's not so much a 3D stage that he chooses for his characters, it's a 2D stage. It's like if you're on stage and then behind you there's a curtain with a scene painted on it. That's kind of the feeling that you get from the kind of stagings that he chooses. And again, this is not like that makes the whole thing bad and terrible and stuff. No, it's just, as you can see, indeed, it's a very standard choice when it comes to animation. As you can see, the clip he's playing from this Christmas special, that's very much the way that this shot is framed as well, and this shot is framed as well. And it's just a stylistic choice. So, moving on from The Odd Ones Out, let's talk about Rebecca Parham of Let Me Explain Studios. Now, she has a slightly different approach to animating, as you can already see if you're paying attention. The bounce that was so prevalent with The Odd Ones Out is kind of absent here. She chooses not to use it, but she still makes use of the same principles of anticipation and follow-through. Here, she's about to change from one pose to another as she's delivering the voiceover. In order to facilitate that change, she leads with a blink. You can see she closes the eye, then follows through. And this is something we're going to see her do multiple more times over the course of this video. This, by the way, is also how I tend to choose to animate my character when I'm doing this kind of thing. A blink is a great way to set up moving the character to a new pose. But generally, she's more happy to, when it comes to, either use very, very subtle motion. I'm not even sure if you even caught that. You can see her eyes. This is synchronized with something that she says. Her eyes flicker ever so slightly, which is a little bit of a hack. Just by having a character blink, or by having their eyes flicker, or by having a tiny little motion happen to them, you can give the audience the illusion that there's still, air quotes, life in the character, even if what you're actually showing them is a rather extended static shot where not much is happening. Just by having that little tiny flicker, you can deliver the sensation of life. Now, as you can see with Parham, she doesn't really do the bouncy anticipation follow-through when it comes to delivering her voiceover. She uses occasionally stuff like blinking to anticipate emotion, but not really with this same compulsive frequency as The Odd Ones Out. She'll do it sometimes, as we are indeed about to see. Here, she's going to use the... you can see here's the anticipation. Just a little tiny wobble as she's getting ready to go into the motion. There's the motion, and there's the follow-through. Just that little tiny wobble. So she uses the same technique, but she uses it differently. It's somewhat less obvious when it comes to her, but it's nonetheless still there. She also uses this particular little trick. When she needs the character to walk with the trolley, she doesn't animate a walk cycle. That takes forever, and they're really difficult to get right. Instead, what she does is just have a walk pose and then have the character stop. Ooh, here comes a really good sequence, by the way. This is one of the things I really like about Rebecca Parham's animation, is that sometimes it's always a question of how much time do I have to do something complicated, as compared to, how long does the video need to be, and do I really have time to spend a lot of time on it? But sometimes she really displays a wonderful command of animation as a language. And I think, if I remember right, she did train as a traditional animator. And you can see here, we see that bounciness that was in the Odd Ones Outs video all the time. She's kind of pooled some resources and reserved them for this particular shot. As you can see, squashing down to stretch all the way up. And then as you reach the peak of the stretch upwards, you can see the mass that's concentrated near the bottom on the shorts gets swung upwards. And then it gets bounced back down again. So you get this fantastic bouncy motion going on. Doing. And another thing I quite like, the character is about to balloon out and become somewhat more round and rotund. So see what she does. She thins the character down. She slims them first, so that when they expand, it happens with a lot more... Oh, good lord, I've got hiccups. Talk about bad timing. When the character expands, there's a lot more bounce to it. Try and notice that. So you get this doing, poing. Stop hiccuping, damn it. Boing, and then flump. Okay, just a sec. I need water. God damn it. I'm not doing this recording over again. We're going with it. And she tends to draw a... When you look at a Rebecca Parham animation, what you get oftentimes is that she strikes a very careful balance between when she's just delivering voiceover, like she is in a shot like this one. Generally, she really doesn't animate much. She does the minimum of what's needed in order to make the characters seem to still be alive. And you can see she's moving through the door here. There's no point animating a walk cycle. It would essentially be a waste of resources to put a ton of time into animating a walk cycle just for this one shot, so she doesn't. But what she instead chooses to focus her animation skill in is stuff like this. And especially the next series of shots with the car. The car is something she spent a lot of time on. First of all, cars are extremely complicated objects, and let me tell you a story. On 101 Dalmatians, if you remember, Cruella de Vil's car is not completely hand animated. What the animators did was they created a model of the car physically, and they photographed it in order to rotoscope over it, because the animators they did not want to have to animate a car by hand, frame by frame, because they are super complex, difficult structures, and they have to move around in a very rigid fashion. So they literally created a model and photographed it and traced over it in order to get the motions that they wanted. So, note what Rebecca Parham has done. Just take notice of how many different angles from which she shows this car. It's from this angle here, from this angle here, from this angle here, and then from the back, and then from the top, and then from this angle, and then she zooms in on the wheels, and then she gives it this low shot angle. And then we get this side shot, and multiple times, like throughout this entire short, that car is animated from so many, or at least drawn from so many different perspectives. I just want to point out that is really fucking hard. Like that, for any artist, that's kind of the kind of thing that you take a look at and go, oh boy, this is gonna be a long one. But she does it, and that's something that I'm very impressed with, especially from this short. It's just how well done the animation on that dang car is. And just how much work went into that particular bit. So let's see. This is something that I'd like you to notice about Rebecca Parham's work, is that more than the Odd Ones Out and more than Jaden's animation, she tends to have a much more cinematic approach to the way that she frames her animations, which is to say, when she needs to figure out a scene, like the one she comes out of the supermarket, she sees the car accelerates, nearly runs her over, and she jumps out of the way. That's what the scene you're about to see is. So see, here's one camera angle. Here's another camera angle from the top where she does a little diagram to set the scene. And this is a very clever move from a filmmaking perspective because she's telling us, okay, I'm not going to be drawing a background on every single frame here, but this is the layout of the environment that I'm in, which gives us a sense of place with what's going on here as she exits out. There's another camera shot. There's another camera shot with a background. And then, you know, the different angle of the car. Here's another camera shot on the car, and another camera shot on the car, and yet another camera shot on the car, and another camera shot on the car, and another shot, 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 and another shot. And there she reuses it. Finally, she reuses some animation in these two little segments, but that's just damn impressive because it's really hard, again, when you have such limited resources to think out a scene in cinematic terms like that. How many different camera angles she uses, how she moves the camera from a neutral position like here to a more frightened, a lower position. This camera angle right here is a low camera angle. You can see it's as though we are a frog looking at the car from below. And that is a choice that's meant to make the car look more dangerous, more intimidating, because it is essentially above us. It is towering over us. As it's revving up, that makes it look more dangerous. And that's a really, from a filmmaking perspective, a really clever move to heighten the threat of this car that's about to accelerate rapidly backwards. So that's something I really like about Parham, is that she has this very cinematic approach to the way that she animates. And that's part of why she makes the choice to maybe not spend so much time animating the character bouncing around with the anticipation and the follow-through, is because she conserves her resources in order to deliver shots like all of these. And let's talk some more about that car, because it is by far the most impressive thing about this short, I think, is the way that she's managed to make this car come to life. This. Take a look at this wheel spin. So, anticipation and follow-through again. Here's the anticipation. You can see the wheel moves ever so slightly. And then speed lines start to come in. But what she's done here, look how the wheel is only really just rotated a little bit again. It's the same wheel. She's essentially copy-pasted from the previous frame, but she's adding, layering over on top of it. She's starting to layer in speed lines. But she does it gradually. She does it no speed lines, some speed lines, and then boom, full speed lines. The whole thing is distorted. And from here on out, these two are the only frames of the wheel she's going to use. These two cycle rapidly at 24 frames per second. They're just hopping back and forth like this. And you can see as I start cycling them back and forth, you kind of start to get the same sensation of rotation. And then the clever thing she does in order to make this appear more real is she uses the smoke. See how she builds the smoke cloud, and as it grows tall enough, see how the wind, the pressure coming off the tires deforms the cloud of smoke and kind of pushes it away, which gives you this real sense of the wheel's sort of almost like power that's being contained, that's being held in place and really, really wants to push forward. And that's a really subtle thing to do with just the smoke effect, but something she pulls off brilliantly with just 2 frames of rapid rotation animation. You can see how well that works. And she does something similar in this shot here. I think she has a few more. Yeah, here she has 3 frames of animation on the wheel. You can see 1, 2, 3, and then cycle 1, 2, cycle. So here it's 3 frames of animation, which makes the wheel look just a tiny little bit slower, not by much, but she's still delivering with this clever use of the smoke clouds, but also another very subtle little effect that's hard to see if I frame by frame through it. But notice that as the wheels are spinning, the car is very slowly getting dragged to the right. See? You can see that. And this is she's essentially creating a contrast of forces. The wheel wants to drag the car to the right, and it's doing a hell of a lot of hard work to drag the car to the right. But because the motion of the car is so slow and gradual in contrast to the rapid rotation of the wheel, we get this sensation that the car is being held back, like that there's something holding onto it, and there's this tension building up, and it's building up, and it's building up, and it's building up as the wheels rotate, because you can see the car really wants to go, it wants to go, it wants to go, it wants to go, it wants to go, and boom, it's gone. And again, this helps build up the tension of the scene that she's about to get run over by this moron revving his car like an idiot. And she's in danger, and all of this anticipation that's being built up for this moment when the car finally starts to move, all of that is being done very subtly just through animation and through camera wobble, by the way. She wobbles the camera a lot to give that sensation of chaos as well. And I think that's just brilliantly done, because an inanimate object, and especially a car, is something that can be bloody hard to animate. And it can be bloody hard to get it right. So I'm really impressed with how she handles the car. The next thing we're going to be taking a look at, again, she reserves her resources for the shots where they really matter. And here she's about to jump out of the way of the car. And take a look at how she does this. First, there's the starting pose. And you can see, once again, she's using a blink to anticipate the next motion, which is crunching down. And once she's crunched down, she uses a little bit of a pull back. You can see she kind of pulls the wagon back, moves her position a little bit to anticipate the first move forward, boom. And now the cart is being thrust forward really hard. And take a look at what she does next, because this is really impressive. First, actually, let's take a look at the scene just in motion. Right, she just jumps out of the way, right? And it doesn't look necessarily that spectacular when you just see it in motion. But the little tricks she uses to pull it off are actually fantastic. As I was saying, she pushes the cart forward. But look what happens. First she pushes it, right? But now look what happens. Right. She stretches like a piece of spaghetti. This is a squash and stretch, which is a very old and very commonly used animation technique. It's in pretty much every single Disney movie, where you can see the character getting stretched out and almost smeared out a little bit. So what's happening here is that she ducks down, leans back, and gives that car a mighty push forward. But then once it's in motion, now it's pulling her instead. And that's where you get this fantastic fluidity of the motion, is that she creates a motion forward and then she continues it by having herself dragged behind it. And it's honestly, it's a very simple bit of animation. Like, it's not, Milt Kahl or anything, but it just shows such a wonderful command of animation techniques. And it's the kind of thing that I really love discovering by going through something like this frame by frame, just to see what the artist does in order to get what she wants out of it. And here again, we can see the cinematic approach that she has to things, right? Because you have the car revving up. From the car's perspective, we're looking at her. And you can see she slowly swings the camera around, right? We start here, then the camera moves a little bit around to her perspective, and then it moves completely in front of her, and then it moves to the other side of her. And this is if I'm not completely mistaken, this is something that's called the 180 rule in filmmaking, which is to say that you never rotate the camera more than 180 degrees in a scene, because you risk disorienting people as to what's going on. So this is just a little filmmaking principle that she's keeping in mind. She's also using bullet time or matrix time. Because watch what happens here. As this shot opens, everything is moving relatively quickly. And then once the car has passed her, you get this quiet moment of slow motion. And then to emphasize it, to make it even more dramatic, she repeats it. But she repeats it from a different angle as she jumps. And the car gets close, and then you get this moment of bullet time again, and another moment of bullet time with her as the car kind of rolls past her, and then to the ending of the shot as she stumbles onto her cart. So yeah, I think that's about it for Rebecca Parham. She's someone who I'm very, very impressed with her command of animation techniques and how cinematic she can be, even while it's just a green flat background with a couple of things moving around inside it, but she nonetheless manages to create this wonderful cinematic feel to the animation that she does. It's really very impressive. Finally, let's take a look at Jaden Animations. Now, Jaden Animations does something that the other two YouTubers we took a look at don't. And you might be able to spot it, actually, if you take a look at her while she's talking. Go away, advertisement, I don't want you. She does lip sync. Now, like I said with the Odd Ones Out, he doesn't do lip sync because lip sync is really bloody difficult. Lip syncing involves, not only do you have to create a series of mouths that fit what you want your character to say. Let's see if I can find a good shot. Usually she opens with some talking. Yeah, there we go. So, take a look at the mouth. You can see she reuses some frames. This frame is the same as this frame. And she reuses that frame as well. She reuses a lot of frames, but the thing about it is the mouth shape on the character has to match more or less the kind of vowel sound or consonant sound that they're pronouncing while that mouth motion is in place. And there's a bunch of principles when it comes to getting a mouth motion right, because you can't just rely on having the mouth open like that the whole time and just flipping it back and forth like this. This is something you see in anime where characters will talk by just essentially waggling their mouth up and down. But what Jaden does is she genuinely deforms the mouth. You can see this motion here as she moves forward to what is probably an ooh sound of some kind. And all of this is just, it's a lot of work. Like, it's not impossible. Clearly, she makes it look easy almost, but it's a ton of work. And it's something that's really hard because you have to listen so carefully to what's being said and exactly what is the timing, and you have to synchronize the motions of the mouth so precisely, and it's just really difficult. So that's one of the things that I'm most impressed with when it comes to Jaden Animations, is that she lip syncs and she commits to it when the character is moving. And in all the videos I've watched, she's never really flubbed it. Like, she's never really failed to make the lip sync look believable. And again, it's hard to communicate this to people who don't animate, but that's really hard because you only have to screw up a little tiny bit before all of a sudden the lip sync looks completely out of whack. So that's the primary thing I'm very, very impressed with Jaden Animations. Now, I consider her sort of a little bit of a halfway point between the Odd Ones Out and Rebecca Parham in terms of her style, is that she is somewhat more cinematically inclined than the Odd Ones Out, but not nearly as much as Rebecca Parham, and she is somewhat more inclined to use the anticipation and the bounce that the Odd Ones Out is than Rebecca Parham does, as you can see here. As she moves in, and you can see just that little wobble as she hits her position. She does that a lot more than Rebecca Parham does, and she uses it to set up big motions like this. You can see, boom, and then you can see again that little wobble as she settles into the follow through. And it's something she uses a lot more than Rebecca Parham, but not as much as the Odd One does. But what she does do is a heck of a lot of this. Like, that was a very subtle piece of animation, this here. Look at the feeling that she's conveying with that character, with a couple of head motions and just a little bit of shifting of the shoulders and a little bit of fiddling here and there. She managed to communicate quite a lot of feeling about what this character is feeling internally. As a piece of acting, this is really quite good. And that's another thing I really quite like about Jaden Animation, is that there's a lot of effort that she puts into the acting of her characters. And this is something, Parham is also quite good at this, but this is something that you don't see quite as much with the Odd Ones Out, because he tends to rely more on, well, this. He relies a lot on the facial expression to deliver the action. He relies a lot on just kind of repeating poses in order to indicate a change in mood, but there's not really that same sense of subtlety. And again, this is not me trying to be shitty to the Odd Ones Out. He's still a very good animator, but he has a different skill set, and he uses it differently. He communicates emotions with his characters in a different way than Jaden Animations. And this is something I love to just stare at this stuff and analyze it and figure out, okay, how does this person approach making a character tell a story? For instance, this little shot here. She's sick and lying on the ground, right? Now, she doesn't need to do anything. She can just show this static image and talk over it, and that would pretty much deliver the message. But watch what she does. what she's essentially doing here, she's redrawing the frame multiple times. And because you can never draw a frame the same way completely twice, you get this wibbly wobbly wiggling sensation from the line art. And that gives the character a lot of life as she's lying there. And it communicates that feeling of being like when you're sick and you're kind of miserable and your whole body just kind of feels like it sucks and it aches. And she gets that just by redrawing the frame multiple times and cycling it and getting that little wobbly feeling on the line art. That communicates so much of the emotion that the character is feeling when they're lying there. And that is just, it's such a clever move. It's just such a clever way to do that. And that's really, you can see she does it again here. The character here on the floor is miserable, so she's wobbly. Whereas the character who is healthy is not wobbly at all. He's in fact very solid and static. So you get this contrast between the way that this character who's sick and miserable moves as compared to the way that this character who's not sick doesn't move. And again, it's doing a lot with a little, which is really the credo, the ethos that these vlogging YouTubers go by, is that they have to do as much as possible with as few resources as possible, which leads us on to this shot, which is actually kind of amazing. For a few reasons, and it's not because it's particularly complicated or difficult shot, but it's because of what she chooses to do. This shot is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, it's 6 frames, repeated over and over again. But do you know how often she's repeating them? Once on every... She's animating on the ones. She's doing this at 24 frames per second. Now, it's only 6 frames looping over and over again, but she's letting it run at 24 frames per second, and look what that does for the acting of the character. Once we get to it. I hate going... Look what that does to the acting of the character. That the motion is very, very smooth, but it's moving really, really quickly. And because it's moving at 24 frames per second, as opposed to a lot of the other animation, this is one of those things I mentioned up front, that you choose the moment when 24 frames per second makes sense. And one of the places that makes sense is here, when she wants this character to be frantic and kind of frightened and wiping down this tabletop, I suppose it is, as quickly as possible. That's when you do the 24 frames per second speed of animation to really drive that feeling home. And then that subtle little bit of animation work. Look at the way the eyes move. And here there's again a little bit of follow through. You can see they wobble a little bit when they get to their position. And that again helps sell the nervousness of the character. And yeah, 36 minutes. That should be pretty much, I think, about enough time to to kind of communicate what I want to communicate with these. Essentially, what I'm trying to say with this video is that these YouTubers are doing amazingly complex work by using as few resources as possible, but very efficiently. And that's really difficult. Like, using resources efficiently to tell a story visually, that's hard. It's really bloody difficult. And there's a reason why I choose to animate my characters mostly by reusing a stock series of faces and hands and just moving them around, instead of animating more traditionally like the rest of these animators do, because it's really hard. I'm really impressed by it. I love nerding out about stuff like this. And if you have enjoyed this, there's a like button right down below my video, not the video you're seeing on screen, but my video, which you're watching, which has a video inside it because videoception. You can leave a comment down below if you so desire. Links to the videos that I've been looking at, and indeed the YouTubers who created them, will be down in the description as well. I recommend you go subscribe to all of them and pause their videos and turn the audio off and just go through frame by frame like I do, because it's just so much fun. My name has been TBSky. If you have a comment, feel free to leave it down there. Subscribe if you're so. I'm almost at 10,000 subscribers now, which is nice. And I'm just asking you very politely to subscribe, and it's not because I crave the round number with every fiber of my being. You just, no, don't worry about it. Just subscribe if you want to. You don't have to. You don't have to.